This is how one scholar summarizes the typical antagonist of the literary monster. He will always be, by contrast, a representative of the present, a distillation of complacent 19th century mediocrity, nationalistic, stupid, superstitious, philistine, impotent, self-satisfied. All this can be applied to the adversaries of Dracula. Because Stoker's characters are so flimsy, readers must make of them what they can. The resulting interpretations are by no means mutually consistent. One aspect to be borne in mind in the personality surveys that follow is Stoker's objective in choosing particular names for his characters. Sometimes it appears he gave no thought to the matter, conjuring up names at whim, but on other occasions it will become clear that his names were carefully pre-selected for ulterior purposes. Only when Stoker's characters have been analysed and their functions ascertained will it be possible to dissect the novel in terms of its multi-faced symbolism. Jonathan Harker. It is fitting that a discussion of the cast of Dracula begins with Jonathan Harker. It is he who is responsible for bringing the Count to London at the beginning, who suffers irredeemable guilt for so doing, and who appropriately severs the villain's throat at the conclusion to rid the world of his menace. A search for the source of the name Harker does not take long. Arminius Vambrey was not the only personal acquaintance whose name was given to posterity through Stoker's fiction. Harker acquired his name from one Joseph Harker, who had occasional assignments as scenic designer and painter for the Lyceum. But this has not prevented further ingenious speculation. Hark, it has been suggested, refers to a danger signal, or an injunction to heed and listen. Jonathan Harker, like Bram Stoker, is a man of the law. To be exact, he is a recently qualified solicitor in his early 20s, practicing in Exeter. Whether he is Exeter born and bred is not clear. Most likely he is not. Stoker is notoriously fastidious about accent and dialect, but Harker's does not draw comment. When the Count requests lessons in English conversation so that he will not stand out as a foreigner in London, he does not seem concerned that he might be absorbing a strong West Country lilt that would defeat his purpose. Like Stoker too, Harker is a Protestant. He possesses a clever, strong, youthful face, and a quiet, frank, business-like manner. He has the virtues of discretion associated with his profession. His hair at the outset is dark brown, but Stoker has the aim of pivoting Harker and Dracula around their common wife, Mina, and as Dracula appears younger and more vital as the plot unfolds, Harker, once his wife has been visited, is drained in reverse. He becomes haggard, his spirits are sapped, and his once dark hair turns snowy white virtually overnight as his energy is transferred via his wife to the Count. This visible deterioration has contributed to wildly conflicting views as to what kind of person Harker is. To some, Harker is simply not much of a man, and appears in much of the book in a passive or supine state. He is something of a half-witted creep, a goody-goody, someone who puts duty before all else. He is a provincial Philistine, is no connoisseur of food and drink, and is a creature of monotonous habit, insisting that he winds his watch before going to bed and folds his clothes in a certain way. He harbours a naive and simplistic belief in the value of the English legal system, with a criminal's right of protection under the law. Even his wife describes him as sweet and simple, though in a way that is meant to be flattering, and he has evidently never had to face any real responsibility in his life. Prior to his Transylvanian ordeal, his very existence in the novel is almost apologetic, a sufficient substitute to act for his employer, who was too ill to undertake the trip himself. Throughout, Harker knows his humble place, particularly when in the company of the other socially superior Dracula hunters. Morally, he is something of a prude, objecting to the tight-fitting clothes of Transylvanian women, and is intellectually curious only in the bigoted way of an insular Englishman who wants his preconceptions confirmed and is completely nonplussed otherwise. But there is another, more positive side to Harker. He is no Little Englander, even though this is his first trip abroad, and seems fascinated by foreign places and customs. The mere fact of his travelling to a virtually unknown land which is in the grip of superstitious mania testifies to his adventurous spirit. He can converse in German, and in his diary reveals him as both observant and alert. In the castle he eventually ascertains the nature of his plight, through his own mental and physical resources. He cannot take advantage of the guiding light provided by Van Helsing. Harker demonstrates both surprising initiative and immense personal courage in trying, while a prisoner, to outwit the Count. Evidently, he works better under strain. Moreover, he has a healthy contempt for snobbery, and is adept at playing prigs at their own game if the occasion demands. What is most remarkable in Harker is the way in which this unassuming, normally placid solicitor, who gives no impression for ever having lifted a finger in anger in his life, is able to resort to extreme physical violence when aroused. Not only is he prepared to take a shovel to the sleeping Count's face, but at the climax, the outraged husband wields a great kukri knife to sweep past a ring of Dracula's armed gypsy's bodyguard. Awestruck, they step aside to permit Harker to slice the throat of their master. When motivated, Jonathan Harker is no mouse, but overall, his most enduring achievement, and the one by which he is best assessed, is that he is one of the few fictional characters to have lived among and been imprisoned by vampires, yet who, by his own guile and courage, survived to tell the tale. More than one of the male characters in Dracula can be seen to be, in certain respects, a projection of Stoker himself, though Harker is the most obvious candidate. Not only is he, like Stoker, at a comparable age, a provincial Protestant man of the law, but Harker reveals to the reader how both he and Stoker came by their knowledge of Transylvanian history and customs, through the British Museum. Furthermore, Harker's sexual fantasies are undoubtedly an extension of Stoker's, a question to which we shall return. Harker also features prominently in one of the major riddles of Dracula. Among the selection of short stories published after Stoker's death was Dracula's Guest, after which the anthology was named. The tale speaks of an unnamed young man journeying to visit Count Dracula, who meets with perilous adventures in Munich en route. In view of the fact that the adventures which befall Dracula's Guest occur on Walpurgisnacht, 1st of May, following which the novel Dracula opens, it is evident that the two tales are related in some way. It is widely believed that Dracula's Guest, published in 1914, is the excised opening chapter of Dracula. In fact, the relationship between Dracula's Guest and Dracula cannot be that straightforward. Stoker's papers, dated the 29th of February 1892, revealed that the Munich events, which are scheduled to span 2 chapters, were themselves to be preceded by an opening chapter presenting a flurry of legal correspondence relating to property sales. It appears, then, that the entire introductory section of the novel, comprising 3 chapters, was at some stage or stages discarded. Further confirmation of this can be found in the page numbers of Stoker's now discovered manuscript of Dracula, where page number 3 overrides a deleted typewritten page number 103. Stoker's original timetable for the novel shows how he intended 3 separate incidents to befall Jonathan Harker in Munich. Taken in sequence, these are, firstly, an adventure in a snowstorm with a wolf; secondly, a visit to the theatre to see a production of The Flying Dutchman, presumably as an aperitif for the real-life immortal he was about to meet; and thirdly, a spooky encounter in a dead house, wherein Harker confronts an image of what later transpires to have been the Count. A deleted reference to the dead house actually appears near the beginning of Stoker's Dracula manuscript, but as neither the dead house nor the Flying Dutchman episodes feature in the 1914 versions of Dracula's Guest, it fails in its supposed function as the prelude to Dracula. Dracula's Guest concerns itself solely with the first of Harker's 3 Munich experiences, when he shelters from a snowstorm in an eerie, forbidding tomb, catches sight of a beautiful woman within, and is rescued by a wolf. Stoker's constant switching of timetable further confuses matters. Originally, it was to be the dead house incident which took place on Walpurgisnacht, not that involving the snowstorm wolf, which was to have occurred some days earlier, on the 27th of April. Stoker's manuscript, however, contains an excised reference to the woman in the tomb on Walpurgisnacht. When did Stoker make his change, and what is the connection with the dead house encounter, also scheduled for that day? This uncertainty, pertaining to the timing and original contents of Dracula's Guest, is heightened by consideration of its published format. To begin with, the narrative style employed in the short story is different from that found in Dracula. Dracula's Guest is not easily identified as a diary entry, being a first-person account that contains much short, sharp dialogue. In addition, the central motives of the 2 tales are quite distinct. In Dracula, the wolf is shown as savage and destructive, the animal familiar of the Count. In Dracula's Guest, by contrast, a wolf warms the body of the insensible guest to protect him from the cold. More critically, the unnamed guest, although identified in Stoker's notes as Jonathan Harker, is unrecognizable from the Harker of the finished novel. In the course of the various drafts, Harker's personality undergoes a radical change. In Dracula's Guest, he is aggressive, almost rude, sufficiently foolhardy to go sauntering off in his own on Walpurgisnacht, an act quite out of keeping with the introverted Harker of the novel. Crucially, Dracula's Guest does not speak any German. The Harker of Dracula does. This discrepancy is significant because Stoker originally intended to base his novel in German-speaking Styria. In a note scribbled in March 1890, Stoker remarks that the Count will insist that his English go-between cannot speak or understand German. Otherwise, of course, the locals would be able to warn him of his peril and convince him of the need to return home. By the time Stoker had relocated his Count to Transylvania, which he had done by early 1892, there was no longer the same pressing demand for Harker's ignorance of German. Although many of that region's inhabitants speak German, their superstitious natures undermine the force of their warnings. It is, in any case, difficult for Harker to escape the all-seeing Dracula powers once he has arrived in Transylvania. In Dracula's Guest, he was unable to escape them even in Munich. Besides, in his mature drafts, Stoker clearly wanted Harker to be made aware of the risk he was running, by allowing him to communicate in German, and so contribute to his predicament by disregarding them. It can, in summary, be maintained that if at some very late stage a chapter of Stoker's final manuscript was excised, that chapter could not have been identical in form to that published posthumously 17 years later under the title Dracula's Guest. More probably, that particular tale as it stands is a self-contained episode reworked from the earliest 1890 to 1892 phase of Stoker's ideas. It is not clear how or when Dracula's Guest came by its name.